Welcome back to Clear 2 View News, where clarity meets conviction. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for updates straight from the heart of America. Today we're shining the spotlight on Vice Presidential candidate J.D. Vance, a man who stands tall against the tide of misinformation and doublespeak. It's about time you heard the truth directly from someone who isn't afraid to stand up for what's right. In a political landscape cluttered with evasion, J.D. Vance offers the straight talk we've been waiting for. He doesn't just answer questions, he tackles them head-on, ensuring every citizen knows where he stands. While the Harris-Walz ticket continues to weave a tapestry of fallacies and evasion, Vance exposes their inconsistencies with facts and unwavering conviction. J.D. Vance isn't just another politician. He's a beacon of truth in a sea of half-truths. He understands the issues, speaks openly, and respects the intelligence of the American people. For more straight-shooting analysis and the real stories affecting you, keep it locked on Clear 2 View News. Subscribe, like, and share our content if you stand for truth in media. If you're committed to real solutions and bold leadership, make sure to subscribe.
I'm from C&G Newspapers, and Iran and Hezbollah are in the news as the world waits for a threatened attack on Israel. You said on a radio talk show this week you suspect that a number of Iranian-related militias that have terrorist agents are within the United States thanks to the current administration. What do we know about these suspected Iranian agents or other terrorists and their leverage? And do you think they're preparing an October 7th style attack in the U.S.? And if so, how does a Trump administration, a future Trump administration or potential one, navigate that Iranian leverage on their foreign policy?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me just say that President Trump noticed that when he was in office, we did not have the world on fire. We did not have a war in the Middle East and a war in Europe and war threatening to break out in East Asia. President Trump was the candidate of peace and prosperity. He delivered peace all over the world. He would do it again if he was president of the United States. Now, what's going on in Israel, again, highlights the weakness of the Kamala Harris administration. Kamala Harris is a person who says she wants the war in Israel to be over with, and also that she wants to minimize civilian casualties. Well, I want those things too. Then why isn't she giving Israel the weapons it needs to minimize civilian casualties? And why isn't she giving Israel the weapons it needs to end this conflict quickly? The best thing for the United States of America is for Israel to end its war, to destroy Hamas, and then to rebuild the Abraham Accords of President Trump so that the Sunni Arab states and the Israelis can form a regional counterbalance to Iran. That is what is in the best interest of our country. That's what's in the best interest of Israel. And it's telling that Kamala Harris refuses to do what she needs to do to keep America and its allies safe. And the final point that I'll say is, yes, I believe that there are Iranian-backed militia groups in this country right now because we know thousands of people have come across the U.S. southern border who have ties to terrorism. Well, it's really endangers your country, and I fear we're going to have a very bad headline here and a lot of people who could lose their lives because Kamala Harris refuses to keep terrorists out of our country. It's disgraceful, but it highlights the fact that unless you have a border, there is no peace and there is no security for American citizens, even in a place as far north as Shelby Township, Michigan. Other questions? Yeah.
Free Press.
Thank you.
When Trump was at the NABJ conference, he was asked whether you'd be ready to assume the presidency on day one, and he responded by talking about how the vice president pick doesn't really impact the election outcome.
Sure.
Was that the response that you were hoping for from the former president?
Well, what the president has said, and I agree with him, is that most people are voting at the top of the ticket. Now, Tim Walz is a crazy radical, of course. He allowed rioters to burn down Minneapolis, but most people are going to be voting for Kamala Harris or for Donald Trump. I think it was a common sense observation. He said it before I was the pick. He said it after I was the pick, and I think he's absolutely right. Now, I will say that on the vice presidential issue, it's interesting what Tim Walz says about Kamala Harris. Tim Walz is a person, again, who promoted rioters burning down the biggest city in his state. This is a guy who wants to give driver's licenses to illegal aliens. This is a guy who wants to take children away from their parents if those parents don't consent to sex changes for minors. This is a radical human being who comes from the far left wing of the Democrat Party. And what Kamala Harris is telling all of us by selecting Tim Walz is that she bends the knee to the far left of the Democrat Party. She's done it every single time in government. She's done it in who she selected as her VP nominee, and she will do it if the American people give her a promotion to President of the United States. We don't have to guess at what Kamala Harris believes. The fact that she keeps on leaning on the most far-left people in the Democrat Party tells us exactly who she is and what she stands for. Sir.
Given a policy speech on immigration essentially today, what is the plan from the Trump team to execute this mass deportation? What will that look like in the United States? How will you make that happen?
Well, I think it's very simple, actually. The first thing that you have to do, and the first thing that President Trump will do, is stop the massive inflow of illegal aliens in the first place. You got to stop the bleeding before you can actually fix the problem here. And we still have thousands of people coming across the border illegally every single day. So the first thing you do, you re-implement deportations, you finish construction of the border wall, and you stop proposing mass amnesty for millions of illegal aliens. That solves the majority of the border problem on day one. President Trump already did it, and he will certainly do it again. Now, to your point about what do you do with the people who are already here, I think it's important that we send a message that if you have come to this country illegally, if you plowed into an innocent mom and her daughter and they lost their lives because of your actions, the message from the Trump administration is simple. Pack your bags because in 4 months, you're going home. We do not consent to an invasion of this country for millions of people who shouldn't be here, and we are going to deport people. Now, you start with the people who are most dangerous. You start with the most violent criminals. You make it harder for businesses to hire illegal aliens, and you work your way down from there. And I think that's how you solve the problem of the people who are here. But if you're not willing to tell at least some of the people who are in this country illegally that you have to go back, then you don't have a real border policy. And unfortunately, that's what Kamala Harris has given this country.
There is a real crisis at our doorstep, the immigration dilemma. With the 2024 elections approaching, the Trump-Vance ticket presents clear, decisive policies that promise to address this ongoing issue head-on. The Trump-Vance strategy is straightforward: secure our borders, uphold the rule of law, and ensure that immigration works in favor of American interests. This isn't just about security, it's about sustainability and respect for the law. We can't afford to ignore the rules that protect our nation. The Trump-Vance approach fixes broken systems and restores integrity to our immigration policies. Their plan includes strengthening border security, revamping visa processes, and ensuring that every entry into the United States is legal and beneficial to our country. For too long, half measures and temporary fixes have undermined our nation's ability to properly manage immigration. The Trump-Vance ticket is committed to ending this cycle with policies that are tough but fair.
Sir.
Last night, Governor Walz suggested that because of your Ivy League education and your Silicon backing your political career, that you yourself are part of the elite. What are your first impressions of them trying to frame you this way to the American public?
Well, look, I came from a family where nobody in my family had ever gone to law school. I grew up in a poor family. The fact that Tim Walz wants to turn it into a bad thing, that I actually worked myself through college, through law school, and made something myself, to me, that's the American dream. And if Tim Walz wants to insult it, I think that's frankly pretty bizarre. Now, look, what really bothers me about Tim Walz, it's not even the positions that he's taken, though certainly he has been a far left radical. You know what really bothers me about Tim Walz as a Marine who served his country in uniform? When the United States Marine Corps, when the United States of America asked me to go to Iraq to serve my country, I did it. I did what they asked me to do it, and I did it honorably, and I'm very proud of that service. When Tim Walz was asked by his country to go to Iraq, you know what he did? He dropped out of the Army and allowed his unit to go without him, a fact that he's been criticized for aggressively by a lot of the people that he served with. I think it's shameful to prepare your unit to go to Iraq, to make a promise that you're going to follow through, and then to drop out right before you actually have to go. I also think it's dishonest. Something, again, if you guys ever get an opportunity to ask Tim Walz or Kamala Harris some questions, he made this interesting comment that the Kamala Harris campaign put out there, and I bet they're regretting they put it out there now, because he said that and he was making a point about gun control, he said we shouldn't allow weapons that I used in war to be on America's streets. Well, I wonder, Tim Walz, when were you ever in war? What was this weapon that you carried into war, given that you abandoned your unit right before they went to Iraq, and he has not spent a day in a combat zone? What bothers me about Tim Walz is the stolen valor garbage. Do not pretend to be something that you're not. And if he wants to criticize me for getting an Ivy League education, I'm proud of the fact that my mamaw supported me, that I was able to make something of myself. I'd be ashamed if I was him and I lied about my military service like he did.
Across the United States, our servicemen and women in every branch of the military give their all to protect our freedoms, our families, and our way of life. Their commitment and sacrifice are the bedrock of our national security and our global standing as a beacon of hope and resilience. These brave souls sign up willing to pay the ultimate price, ensuring our safety and upholding our values. To then see individuals, particularly those in positions of influence or authority, misrepresent or lie about their military service is not just disappointing, it's disgraceful. Fabricating service records or the nature of one's discharge dishonors every uniformed brother and sister who has served honorably. It undermines the very essence of valor and integrity that our military instills in its members from day one. Our veterans and active duty military personnel deserve the highest respect and accurate representation of their heroic deeds. Let us always remember and honor their true sacrifices, not tarnish their valor with falsehoods. The way we speak about and represent our military experiences should reflect the highest standards of honesty and respect, the very standards that every serviceman and woman pledges to uphold.
Sir. Could you speak a little louder? Sorry.
Will Jones from Local 4. I want
Yes,
to talk
sir.
a little bit about race. I was at the National Association of Black Journalists conference last
Yes,
week
sir.
where President Trump made some attacks on Vice President Harris's biracial heritage. You're married to an Indian American woman. You have biracial children. How do you explain his attacks, and what is your reaction to his attacks as a father of biracial children?
Yes, sir. So I am the father of biracial children. Actually, my wife is here today, though my kids are back home with my aunt today. And look, I was not bothered at all by what President Trump said, and I didn't take it as an attack on Kamala Harris's biracial background at all. What I took it as was an attack on Kamala Harris being a chameleon. She pretends to be one thing when she's in front of one audience. She pretends to be something else when she's in front of another audience. And I think he was observing the basic foundational reality that Kamala Harris pretends to be something different depending on which audience she's speaking to. Now, she has been able to hide this a little bit because for the past couple of weeks, she only speaks in front of a teleprompter. She never gives unscripted remarks, and she's hidden from the American media and from the American people. But we know she's a chameleon. We know she's a person who promised to defund the police and now wants to pretend she's a tough prosecutor. She said that she would be our border czar, and yet for 3.5 years, we have an open border. She said that she would bring some common sense and lower inflation to our economic policies, and yet she cast the deciding vote that raised interest rates, raised home prices, and raised food prices. Donald Trump said something very simple, totally inoffensive, but frankly, obviously true to me, which is that Kamala Harris is a chameleon. She's a fake, and the American people have to look at her record if we actually want to know how she stands on the issues, because her words simply can't be trusted.
What makes you smile? What makes you happy?
Well, I smile at a lot of things, including bogus questions from the media, man. I mean, look, I think if you watch a full speech that I give, I actually am having a good time out here, and I'm enjoying this. But look, sometimes you got to take the good with the bad. And right now, I am angry about what Kamala Harris has done to this country and done to the American southern border. And I think that most people in our country, they can be happy-go-lucky sometimes, they can enjoy things sometimes, and they can turn on the news and recognize that what's going on in this country is a disgrace. And if what Kamala Harris has done at the southern border, and if what Kamala Harris has done to raise the price of groceries and housing, if that doesn't bother you, then I think that you don't have a pulse, right? And so, look, I think my message to the American people is very simple on this, that President Trump in particular has the best sense of humor of anybody I've ever seen in American politics. He loves to joke. He loves to tell, he loves to make fun of everybody that's out there. And I think you got to do that from time to time. But he's also a guy who's very frustrated with what Kamala Harris has done to this country. Both of those things can be true. And I think most Americans can joke around, but also be pissed off about the direction of this country. Thank you, sir. Ma'am?
Hi, Kimberly Craig, 7 News Detroit. Right here in Shelby Township, there's going to be a mother, a father, a senior citizen struggling to pay their bills, put food on the table, pay the utility bills. When you speak of the prosperity in a Trump administration, what can you, speaking to that person, what does that look like?
Well, I think that, I'm 40 years old. I actually just had my 40th birthday, which I'm not too happy about. But I'm 40 years old, and for my entire life, there was this chart that had wages below corporate profits and below the size of government. And there was one 4-year period during my entire life where wages were actually going up, especially for people at the bottom and people at the middle. That was the 4 years when Donald Trump was president. And so my message to people who are struggling is, first of all, I know what it's like to struggle. My mamaw once negotiated with a Meals on Wheels person so that she could get more food from Meals on Wheels so that she could feed me and her. I certainly know what it's like to deal with skyrocketing grocery prices and skyrocketing rent. the solution to it is to give people higher paychecks. The solution to it is give people better take-home pay. The solution is to unleash American energy so that people aren't going to the grocery and seeing that eggs are 50% more than what they were a year and a half ago, right? You've got to bring down prices to give people basic prosperity. And the way you do that is really unleashing American energy, unleashing American farmers, and not spending like a drunken sailor, which is what Kamala Harris has done during her time in office. We really do know that it's the least of these. The Bible calls them the least of these who have suffered the most under Kamala Harris's affordability crisis. And President Trump and I, that is priority number one, is to make groceries and gas and rent more affordable for normal Americans. If you work hard and play by the rules, this very simple principle should apply. If you work hard and play by the rules, you should be able to live a good life in this country. And unfortunately, a lot of people right now are working hard and they're playing by the rules, but they can't afford groceries and they can't afford rent because of bad policy in Washington, D.C. We promise that we're going to change that. One last point I want to make on this, because I don't think that we talk in the media, we don't talk about it enough in politics, but housing is through the roof, and housing is destroying people's savings and their ability to put a good house, put a good roof over their kid's head. So here's the thing. Why is housing so expensive in this country? Housing is so expensive in this country for two reasons. Number one, Kamala Harris pursued policies that raised interest rates, which make mortgages unaffordable for normal Americans. That's number one. And number two, we have let in 20 million illegal aliens who are competing with American citizens for scarce housing. You do those two things and you see the rent crisis that you see in Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania. It is a disgrace. President Trump and I promise we will fix it. It's simple public policy. It's just got to be smarter, and it's got to look out for American citizens first.
The housing crisis gripping our nation isn't just an economic issue. It's a profound moral challenge that demands immediate and concrete solutions. J.D. Vance offers a roadmap that goes beyond mere rhetoric to actionable policies that promise not just relief, but a sustainable transformation of our housing landscape. Vance's approach is clear: reduce regulatory barriers that inflate construction costs and stifle supply, encourage development through tax incentives, and support localities in revising outdated zoning laws that hinder the building of new homes. His plan focuses on empowering communities to solve their unique challenges, rather than imposing one-size-fits-all mandates from Washington. Critically, Vance understands that, to genuinely address the housing crisis, we must tackle the root causes: an overbearing regulatory environment, lack of infrastructure investment, and economic policies that do not prioritize middle and working-class Americans. By proposing to streamline processes and boost investment in critical areas, Vance's policy framework aims to revive the American dream of homeownership. This isn't just about putting roofs over heads. It's about crafting a policy environment where economic growth and housing development go hand in hand, enhancing our communities and enriching lives. With Vance's roadmap, we have a clear path to not only solve the housing crisis, but to set a foundation for a prosperous future for all Americans.
Sir?
Colin Jackson, Michigan Public Radio Network. Michigan is a state that's going to be one on the margins. It's projected to be a close race. When former President Trump was in Detroit a few months back, he was talking to black voters. He was tried very hard to tie President Biden to the crime bill while taking credit for criminal justice reform. Right now, you're here in Shelby Township with tough on crime, mass deportation message. Do you feel like that's going to land with voters of color that the campaign will need to win?
Well, look, I think my message to voters of color is very similar to my message to voters everywhere in Michigan, which is we want to redeliver peace and prosperity, right? Voters of color really benefit when wages are rising. Voters of color really benefit when normal people can afford to buy a home, and we want to bring back some of those common sense policies. But if you look at the statistics, when you allow rioters to set fire to a city, or when the police are not empowered to do their job, it is very often voters of color that suffer disproportionately, right? It is voters of color who benefit the most from public safety, and I think that we have to get some common sense back. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that we don't want police to have good relationship. Tough on crime does not mean tough on every single person who lives in a neighborhood with high crime. But when I talk to people in neighborhoods with high crime, often, not always, of course, voters of color, they actually love the police. They've got good relationships with the police. Of course, there are bad apples here and there, but most people recognize the police are there to keep them safe. And if we don't make it possible for the police to lock up the bad guys, the murderers, the armed robbers, then it is very often black voters, especially in the state of Michigan, who suffer the most. You know, one thing that really bothers me about the left's narrative on criminal justice reform and a lot of their attacks on police is, again, that it is very often black voters who suffer the most when the police aren't empowered to do their job. We have got to change this. There's an idea out there, I think, that Americans often forget, that the worst violent criminals, right? It's a very small group of people who commit the most egregious and most often commit the worst violent crimes. Nobody, black, white, or anything else, wants us to do anything other than lock up the most violent criminals. You do that, and you empower the police to do that, you solve a whole host of the violent crime problem, and voters of color, I think, benefit from that as much as anybody.
As we wrap up today's discussion, it's clear that the stakes have never been higher. The conservative movement is not just about preserving traditions. It's about promoting policies that address real issues, from the housing crisis to immigration reform, with practical and principled solutions. J.D. Vance's roadmap for addressing housing underscores a commitment to slashing bureaucratic red tape and empowering local communities, aligning perfectly with our conservative values of liberty, responsibility, and community engagement. At Clear 2 View News, we're dedicated to bringing you the unvarnished truth, supporting a movement that values the rule of law, fiscal responsibility, and the sanctity of our constitutional rights. Every like, every comment, and every subscription drives forward the cause of true conservative values, ensuring that your voice is not just heard but echoed across the nation. Remember, your engagement doesn't just support our channel, it amplifies the call for a return to principles that have stood the test of time. Subscribe, like, share, and comment to join the conversation and help shape the future. Together, we can ensure that conservative ideals not only guide today's policies, but pave the way for a brighter, more prosperous future. Thank you for tuning in to Clear 2 View News. We look forward to continuing this journey with you. See you in the next video.